Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and welcome to the second installation of the summer webinar series on farm transition and farm business succession planning. We're happy that you're here, and today's topic is really going to be on that business succession planning, just giving you some ideas and some thoughts on that. But then also we're going to go over a case study for fair versus equal. We're also going to be talking about business entities and property ownership, and then a little bit about basis and what basis is. So we're excited to be here today. As you see on our screen, it is a 4-part series. So last week was about goal planning and family communication. And I'll just say that if any of you had any trouble getting on last week, we're sorry, we had some Zoom gremlins with us. So we do have that up on YouTube, so you can catch up and watch that. Also, on this link on this screen, there is, and in the chat, we'll put it in the chat, there is a link to a resource folder that has some resources from last week, as well as the slide deck from last week. And then this week's slides are in there too. So in case you want to have that PowerPoint printed out and take notes, you sure can do that. And then there's the link to the YouTube page. So I'm Suzanne Hendricks. I'm an extension educator on the agricultural business management team at University of Minnesota. I have with me our colleagues Nathan Holinsky, who's going to be teaching on this session at the end of the slides, and then Dave Bow, who's been working with extension and this topic, farm transition, for a long time, and he's here as well to handle any questions that might come in. So again, questions. Use your Q&A feature at the question and answer feature, and put your questions in there. At the end, we will answer questions, or as we're transitioning from me to Nathan, we can take some questions at that time too. So we look forward to your questions, and at the end, we will be available for questions as well. So let's get started. Our topic today is about farm business succession. And what does that mean? We talked a little bit about it last time. Farm business succession is really about that management piece and that decision-making piece for your farm business. What does that look like? What it involves, the things that you decide on each day, or maybe on an annual basis, what grain to use, what seeds to plant. If you are looking at genetics on your beef cattle, it's about that, those overarching decision-making pieces. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. As I said, Dave Bow, Nathan Holinsky, and I are the ones leading this webinar series. So those are our email addresses and how to contact us. So having transition and estate goals and being able to communicate those goals to your family, that's really important. You know, I know that this is a lot of information that we are sharing in this webinar series. So that's why we record it. It's important for you to be able to take chunks of information, think about them, maybe act on them, and then come back and get some more information. So that's why we put them up on our YouTube page, because thinking about your action steps and then how you want to communicate that, all of that is wrapped into, there's a lot of information there. So we provide it for you to be able to come back to it if you're interested in looking at those videos. We know that not all farms are the same. So, you know, this information that we're sharing, it's ideas for you to think about, things for you to start on your process. Some of you are well into your process of a farm transition. Maybe you're 5 years into your transition. Maybe you're just starting to think about this. So we're all at different places in this path, in this journey, but also all of our farms are different. You might have 2 dairy farms that are right beside each other, but how the family, your ancestors have run that farm, that makes your farm unique. And so every farm is different. All this information, we're sharing it with you. Take it in and use what you can, and come back for more with the videos that are posted to YouTube. So we want to just frame our discussion today in these business components. So as you think about farm transition, the business components that you can break down of your farm are these 4 topics. Labor is a big one, and that's a great place to start as you're thinking about a farm transition. You know, who's involved with working on your farm? Is it a son? Is it a daughter? Is it someone that isn't related to you, but is hired as a farm worker on your farm? Is it someone that you're maybe going to be working with to think about, I think that they would be a good manager of this farm. Maybe they would be interested in running my farm, thinking about helping them learn more about not just the ongoings each day of your farm, but also those management topics that you make decisions on, or things that you're leading at your farm. So that's a business component in farm transition that you can be looking at. And it's a good one to start with, because you can identify who is working with you. They might already be working with you on the farm as an older generation, the ownership generation. That might be a person that you're going to guide and mentor in that farm transition. A younger person might be thinking, oh, I'm working here on this farm. What is in this for me? They're hoping that they might be able to work into management of the farm and someday have that farm. So there's both sides of that coin. We know that the income piece is also something to look at. Can the farm provide income for 2 generations? Or do you need to be thinking about maybe the younger generation continues to have an off-farm job so that you can make sure that you have enough income to go around? You want to make sure that you look at your expenses, and then how much is that bottom line. And then management, we know that those management decisions, like I was just talking about, are pieces that you're going to be looking at for your business component. Not only when are you going to, make those bales, but also, are you going to store them? Do you need a new shed to be housing them in? That's a management decision. Things like that would be those decisions that you're making in a year's time, in a weekly basis, maybe monthly. And then the final business component that you probably look at years down into a farm transition would be those assets and ownership. The ownership of the land, that's something that you look at years down the road. But then also you have the assets, might be a tractor. Maybe you have a tractor that you think we need to start thinking about replacing this tractor. And maybe that's an opportunity for the younger generation to provide some leadership on replacing that piece of equipment. Maybe you look for an FSA loan or something to make that happen, so that then there's a little bit of both generations involved. So these are business components that you can think about, kind of break down your farm transition into these thoughts so that you don't have to think about it as a overwhelming, fire hose of information. These are ways to think about it and break it down. So if we think about the business life cycle, this is a traditional and normal trajectory with a bell curve. You start out as a young farmer. You think you have ideas, you might implement something. Maybe you change the way the barn looks. Maybe for a dairy barn, you've made some changes. Maybe you are thinking, okay, we're going to do a little bit of different production in a crop. You want to choose a different seed or something. So you make some changes, you have some growth, maybe you invest in some additional land, or you find a neighbor who wants to rent some land to you. That's that growth. And then over a few years' time, you mature in your business and your business acumen of how you run your farm, and you find things that are working for you. And then you mature, and then it could decline. But if you think about a farm transition, what the beautiful part about this is, if you're able to communicate your goals, if you're able to talk about the things that you have going on as a decision-making and management decision part of this, you can actually give that second generation or your next operator a really great place to jump off from. So as you look at that bell curve, you might hit maturity a few years into your farming operation. And instead of it declining, you can actually have them start at that growth and where it's mature, and then they get to jump into the farming operation and take it into a new level. So think about farm transition in this way, because that's our whole goal, is to make sure farms are able to transition their know-how and how you've successfully ran your farm to a next generation or a new operator. So there's the maturity piece, and that you can jump off into that growth part again from a really great spot. So if we think about business succession on a farm in this way too, a farm transition and business succession for your farm, thinking about it in these ways with testing, commitment, established, and withdrawal, that's a great way to think about it. So let's take labor. You might maybe think about, all right, I have a niece who comes by the farm quite a bit. She wants to be involved whenever we have something going on. She might be someone that's interested in this farm. So you test it out a little bit, bring her on to do more work. Maybe she figures out how to balance another job with your farm. I don't know, whatever it is, that could be. You test it out, see how it goes. Does she like working on this farm? Does she like that farming life? Then you kind of move into commitment. You think about, okay, how can we solidify this? And then you move into a few years later, all right, we've established that we are working well together, and we're going to continue this on until someday that older generation says, I think I'm going to move away from management of the farm. So that's something that I think is a way to look at this. Same thing with income or management or ownership. You would start with testing out your foot. How is this going to work? Think about and try some things, communicate about them, and then you move into commitment. So here's another example of it. There's how long for each of these stages. You think about, all right, I have a lot of time that I can invest in this, or maybe you don't. Maybe there's a health concern that you need to act on this quickly. So however you have as time for your farm and for your farm transition, that is how you work with it. It doesn't have to be any set or prescribed situation. You move into testing and figure out how to work with each other. And then you kind of work into that commitment stage where you're both committed to working together to make this farm situation go. And then you have an established situation. It could be that you are going to go order the seed that you're going to plant for next year's crop. All right, bring that person with. That's a decision-making point. So bring that younger person with that you're starting to farm with. Then the next year, maybe have them lead. Maybe they make the appointment to go talk with the salesman. You give them opportunities to lead. And then when you feel like it's kind of established, where they have a good handle on what kinds of seed you buy, why do you buy that hybrid? What are the reasons that your farm does what it does? Then you give that younger person time to be able to maybe be the one to make some of the decisions, and then maybe make all the decisions. Then that older generation can say, you got this, let's move on to teaching something else. So there's lots of stages in this process, and I appreciate that some of them can be shorter and some can be longer. So you think about that shorter transfer. If you want to make this, you're tired of farming, or maybe you're tired of milking cows, or maybe you have a health concern that makes your time transition shorter, that can be fine. You have that middle time in there that's shorter. You work really hard on transferring your knowledge to the next generation. Maybe you have a longer transition time. You're thinking about 5 years, 10 years. You know, maybe you have a a son or a daughter, or maybe it's a niece or nephew, or someone that's not even in your family that has been gone from the farm for a few years. And maybe they need to get up to speed. You know, this shorter time period could be someone's already been working on your farm. They know how you do things. That could be a shorter transfer as well. The longer transfer might be someone's coming back from the farm, they're moving their family back to the farm, and they need to get up to speed. How have you been doing? What have you been making decisions about, and how have you been making those decisions? That could be a longer transition. Or maybe you really aren't ready as an older generation to transition the farm yet. Then you take a little bit longer, but still teaching all the way, mentoring that younger generation. So like I was mentioning, the timeline really depends on the things that you have going on in your life. It might be about health. Maybe there is a health concern, or maybe you want to be able to go travel more. Maybe you really have a goal of getting out there and traveling. Maybe it's finances. Maybe your transition of your farm needs to take a little bit longer because you're going to have that younger generation having a second job someplace else, and you're going to try to figure that out as time goes of that transition. The abilities and wishes also, you know, the wishes are something that maybe the younger generation has a desire to start something entirely new on your farm. Maybe it's a new crop, or maybe it's an agritourism thing, or who knows what it might be. If you have different wishes that you want to work into your farm, that could play into this as well. So a really great part and place to start, if you're thinking about this farm transition, is to think about the labor piece. Who is working on your farm, and how you can transition them into management decisions. So we have an example for you. This is just a thought. So as you listen to our webinars, we are giving you resources and thoughts so that you can think about how would this work for your farm and your family. So maybe you have a phased plan approach where the owner generation is making decisions and mentoring the younger generation. That could happen for a year, that could happen for 2 years, that could happen for longer. Then that next number 2 phase could be the owner and the person who's coming in next, the business successor. They're starting to make decisions together. So in the example of buying the seed for next year's crop, maybe you make the decisions as the older generation first. And then as you kind of mature in your mentorship with that younger generation, you make the decisions together. Like, I was thinking this, what do you think? And then you make some decisions together. And then phase 3 of this approach would be that the younger generation, or whoever is being kind of groomed or mentored to succeed on the farm as the next successor, would make decisions and then check in with that older generation. This is what I'm thinking, or this is the decision I made. So that you're preparing that younger generation to really be equipped to run the farm, because it's complex and there's a lot that you're dealing with in a year's time. So might be, you know, we need a new planter. Why are we going to choose this planter? Well, those decisions could be made together, and then you could transition into having the younger generation make some decisions too. And I understand too that this doesn't always go smoothly. We hear stories a lot. Dave has told us quite a few stories that he knows of that this doesn't always go smoothly. So give yourself time to cool off if you don't agree with something, but I encourage you to come back and try discussing it again. So if you have different thoughts on which planter to purchase, you know, last week's webinar was on communication styles. Maybe one person needs to think about something for a longer time. Bring those thoughts into play, and I encourage you to come back and keep it going, because your farm is worth it. So here's another really example that we want to give you of how you could think about these stages. So if you're testing the waters, maybe you have a daughter who is coming into the farm. Maybe she's been working on your farm all along. You want to have her as the entering generation be able to start making some day-to-day decisions and also those overarching management decisions. Start with the day-to-day decisions. Have that next generation begin, maybe in this example, maybe they manage the herd, the breeding program, making sure that she's paying attention to genetics and really focusing on that breeding program. That would be the day-to-day decisions that she's in charge of. The commitment stage, here's another example. You would have in that commitment stage, you have the entering generation who wants to take over the management of one of your farm enterprises. So maybe it's an example of your son manages the dairy operation while the dad, and maybe it's a daughter manages the dairy operation while the dad or the mom manages the crop operation. So those are things that you can think about, ways you can divide up leadership on your farm so that you're giving that younger generation practice to be making those decisions. Once things have kind of worked themselves out and you have established your new norm, working with two generations, you know, have both generations managing overall all the farm operations. An example could be that you both meet with a lender to discuss financing options. Maybe you've discovered that, all right, we need to put up a new pole shed. Maybe you do need to get lending for some reason. Go together to meet with that lender so that you're giving the younger generation ideas on how this works and how you've worked as a farm. And then that withdrawal piece would be, you would think about that older generation or the ownership generation would start to give up that decision-making and management leadership. And you feel confident that that next generation knows how you've done things. They're incorporating their ideas and they're being able to make really solid decisions. So that's kind of how this farm transition, farm succession can work when you're moving from one generation to the next. It really is about mentorship and bringing in that next generation so that they're learning how you have kept your farm going, how you have been successful. So I just want to have you think about, before I transition into a case study, about, you know, how are you doing on your farm succession goals? Are you just starting? Have you been thinking about this for a while, but you want to take the next step? Are you actively starting this process? Are you midway? Or are you looking at this from the rearview mirror? So however and wherever you are, we hope this information is helpful for you. So I'm going to transition a little bit into a fair versus equal discussion. So we'll go on, and Nathan, if there were any questions that came in, let's handle them when you and I transition from slide deck to the next slide deck. So farming and non-farming heirs. Let's talk a little bit about how you handle, you might have one of the kids, maybe it's an heir outside of your immediate family, such as a niece or a nephew or someone else that you're working with that has been involved with your farm, who is, you know, really added a lot of effort and value to your farming operation. And you might also have some kids in your immediate family, maybe it's your own children, maybe it's others, nieces and nephews or whatever, that are not involved in the farm. They've sought a life elsewhere, maybe they have their own farming operation somewhere else, or maybe they're working, they've sought new opportunities. So how do you deal with this as fair and impartial, but yet equal, not equal? So these are things that we have to think about, and I know that this is on your mind. We get a lot of questions about this. How do you treat everyone fairly and equally? Well, you do treat fair. If you think about the definition of fair, fair means impartial without favoritism. And equitable comes into play there. Being fair, try not to be partial, no favoritism. But then also equal is probably not a great situation for a farm, because we know that being equal, the same quantity, the same value, the same amount, that's really hard to do, because you want to make sure that the farm is viable to go forward. You want all those acres to be a part of that farming operation. So those are pieces that you have to think about. This fair versus equal is an important part. You want the farming heir to be able to be successful with that farm intact the way it is, but also leave an inheritance to the non-farm heirs. So if you think about, maybe you have 3 children, one is farming with you and 2 aren't. How do you deal with that? So we have a case study here that we want to kind of walk through to help you think about and give you some ideas on this. So bear with us as we have the Kettle Farm as an example. So we have Ma and Pa Kettle. So it's kind of funny names, but it gets a really great example on how to think about treating people fairly versus equally in a farm transition situation. So Ma and Pa Kettle, they have Kettle Farm, and they have 3 children. They have one, Farmer Junior. Farmer Junior farms with them. He has been farming with them for a long time. He has really added value, and he's become an equal partner to Ma and Pa in the farming operation. Middle and Special are the other 2 kids. They have sought other opportunities. They might be a dentist or a doctor, or they might be working at a business someplace else, but they are not involved with the farm. They come around, they visit, but they're not involved with the daily operations or the management of the farm. All the kids are great kids. They're all young adults now. So if you look at the example here, the Kettle Farm was started in 1994. Its worth at that time was about $300,000. So this is just an example. Now, in today's world, the Kettle Farm is worth about $3 million, $3,300,000, we're going to say. So what do you do when you're thinking about farm transition and how to transfer this fairly? We know that, if Farmer Junior is going to continue to farm, he needs those acres to farm on that land. Dividing it up would be hard. So what if you just divide it up in an equal share? Special, Middle, and Farmer Junior would each get part of the farm. That would be, if in today's dollars, it'd be about worth 3 million. So that would be about $1 million for each kid. That's going to be a tough situation, because a farmer needs to continue on with the farm. So here's some additional information. This slide has a lot of information, so I'll read and expand on it. So Ma and Pa, in this situation, they have helped Middle and Special through college, and have helped them get established. So they probably have gone on to do some sort of career outside of the farm. Farmer Junior, he did go away, but he came back to the farm, and he's been involved with farming for now about 30 years. So he's been involved, he's contributed a lot, and Ma and Pa feel that the farm, they've gained a lot of market value, they've gained experience, they've gained a lot with his help in the farm. So farmers' contributions have been vital to the farm. Farmer Junior, I should say. Ma and Pa agree that if it had not been for Farmer Junior returning to the farm, they would likely not have kept farming. So this is their case. It might not be the case for your farm, but that's what this case study. So Ma and Pa said that for the last 30 years, Farmer Junior has been an equal partner. He's done a lot of effort. He's put in lots of hours, and his it's important for him to be able to be treated as an equal partner here. So they wouldn't have had the growth that they had without his involvement. So Mom and Pa believe that Farmer Jr. has made a significant contribution to their estate. So should each child be treated equally, and what's fair? So we have an idea for you of how this could be handled. So this has a lot of words on it too, so I'll walk us through it. So if you think about the value of the farm in 1994, that was 300,000. They do have 3 kids. So at that time, that farm without Farmer Jr.'s involvement would have been worth 100,000 for each kid, 300,000. That's just talking about the value. Farmer Jr. though has become a 50-50 partner with Ma and Pa. So he's been working on the farm, and they've grown that farm to a value of about $3 million. So what they're thinking is that Farmer has half of that farm right now at about 1,500,000, and Ma and Pa, their share of it would be about 1,500,000 too. So if you think about partner's share, which is Farmer Jr., at the origination of the farm, it was valued at his portion would have been about 100,000. Then we know that the partner right now with growth and contribution, it's about 1,500,000. His part would be, and then $500,000 would be the estate. So you really think about how you're going to divide up for each kid, each child, each heir, their inheritance. So what Ma and Pa here have thought to do is that Farmer, he is going to continue on with his share of the farm because he is a partner in that farm. So that's 1,500,000. If you look at Farmer receives 2,100,000 total as his share, it's because he is a partner in that farm. And then he's also receiving a part of the inheritance that Ma and Pa are going to divide out to each of the kids, which would be about 500,000. And then they also have said, all right, at the beginning of our farm, that would have been about $300,000 in value. So we're going to share that with each of our kids too. So that's how partners total, Farmer Jr.'s total becomes that $2 million. And then each of the kids in this situation, the other 2 that aren't on the farm, their part of their inheritance would be that inheritance that Ma and Pa are deciding of 500,000. Plus, they're also thinking about that 100,000 per child from the origination of the farm. So that's how they're coming up with 600,000 in this example. And 600,000, that's a value number. You can think about how you would fund that. It could be that Ma and Pa have owned land someplace other than what Farmer Jr. has been involved in. Maybe they're going to have inheritance be in that land. Or maybe they decide that they're going to do insurance policies that would be worth that much. I mean, there's quite a few ways that you could think about funding that. And that would be just an example of how you might be able to think about this. It could be money in the bank that you've saved, or you might have retirement investments that you would designate for special and middle, the other 2 kids that haven't been on the farm. So those are some thoughts to get you thinking about how you might be looking at your farm situation and how you might be able to think about your children or those that you might want to pass on your farm and inheritance to. So here it is kind of out in a different example, or at least a different diagram. Here it shows that special and middle at that 600,000, and Farmer K with his valuation of the farm plus his inheritance. So this is really important because if you were to think about dividing up all the land and just say, you guys decide about it when I die, that's hard because then the kids don't know what your wishes are as the older generation. It's really important for the older generation to think about what they want to have happen, with the number 1 goal being that your farm is going to continue as a farm and operating. So that is really number one lead. And hopefully that is a goal for many of you out there listening. So that's the end of my slide deck. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and see where we can answer some questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Nathan so he can start his slides.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was on the wrong slide. How's everyone doing today? Okay, so Suzanne was just wrapping up the fair versus equal session and how, different families can split that up differently depending on what their individual family needs, requirements are. And I'm going to continue on talking about some business structures, and we'll go from there. So again, there are different structures that we can use. There are different types, and we'll go over some brief details. So again, we'll talk with sole proprietorship, where again, we're going to be farming together. Suzanne mentioned some of these topics a little bit ago. And a partnership, right? Where partnerships, they're going to have different levels of partnerships. There's different options for partnerships that exist, from both the general partnership, which is going to be fairly non-formal, no liability protection. We also have partnerships that have some liability protection, and we'll kind of highlight those in a bit. And we do, before you form any of these different business structures, you need to talk with your accountant. There are tax consequences and record-keeping consequences for all of these different entity decisions. So don't go into these half-heartedly, and make sure you know all the ins and outs of what you're getting into, what you're getting involved with moving forward. Okay, so again, the general partnership, that's going to be a little bit less formal, where you have two or more people involved. All partners generally are going to be liable for debts and obligations of the partnership, including both personal and partnership assets. So I guess both farm and personal assets are all going to be kind of grouped together. But there's no liability protection. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Minnesota state law does not require a partnership agreement, but we do heavily suggest it. And the partnership agreement's going to go over, what people are contributing to this partnership, what are their particular assets, what is the breakdown, what is the split on the income coming off of it. So kind of breaking that down, because everybody's in agreement until we're not. Let's say that down the road that the one brother wants to retire and dissolve his partnership share, and maybe he wants to sell it to his son or his nephew or whoever that person is. How do you determine a price? And part of that goes into, what did this individual contribute at the start, and what is the breakdown of, again, some of that income splitting. So again, that partnership agreement is a pretty good idea. We also have these limited liability partnerships, and that's going to be, again, two or more people involved. General partners are liable only to their extent in the partnership. So again, you do have that liability protection from other partners in the business. But it's very similar to a general partnership, but with the more formalized legal structure. We do want to highlight this is an LLP. There are also LPs and LLLPs. So we have different formulations different exact qualifications for these different types of partnership structures. And again, if you are curious or you think this has some benefit for you and your business, talk with both a lawyer to help get this set up and your accountant on some of the record keeping and tax consequences to make sure it is the best thing for your operation. Limited liability company. Okay, so again, one or more persons. This is more commonly shortened to an LLC. So it can function with a partnership or a pass-through corporation for taxation. So you have a couple different options for that. Has some liability protections similar to that corporation. But again, you just got to make sure you're setting everything up properly. Talk with your professionals to make sure you're doing this, again, as need be. LLCs have been becoming very popular. They're very common. They're a little bit more easy to set up than some of the next more corporate heavy entities that I'll talk about in a little bit. LLCs have a little bit more flexibility, a few more options on both the taxation and the structure, and the ease of setting them up is a little bit more. Whereas we have the corporation. There's two separate corporations, both S and C. Again, these corporations, they are a distinct, separate entity from individuals. So again, if you do a general partnership, it's really not a separate entity. It's just kind of a form of business, where this corporation is a lot more distinct and separate. Okay, S corporations can elect to be a pass-through entity for taxation, where the business itself isn't taxed and the profits from that business are passed through to the corporation owners. Or the C corporation can be taxed as an entity, so a separate, Helensky Farm C corporation will be taxed as the separate business, and then also at the individual level. So in a C corporation, there is a little bit of a double taxation. Typically not a huge issue, because there's also additional tax deductions that we can take into account. Okay, operating assets can go into the corporation. So maybe that's going to be your equipment. Maybe it's going to be the livestock. We do recommend not putting land in the corporation, especially with the C corporation. With the S corporation, there isn't as many negative connotations or negative consequences that can happen down the road, because as our bottom bullet point points out, getting in is a tax-free event. Setting up these entities can be tax-free, but getting out is not. And it can be very negative in terms of tax payments, putting a bunch of land into a C corporation, and then 10 years later, we want to dissolve that C corporation because there's a lot of potential tax increases or values with that land, and it can be expensive. So just be warned. And like I mentioned right away, before setting up one of these different entities, make sure that it's the proper step and it's what you want to do for your business. So again, the corporation, some of the benefits of it, it's the continuation and longevity of the farm. It's not Ma and Pa Kettle Farm. It's just Kettle Farms LLC or Kettle Farms S Corporation, whatever the proper business entity that you want to set up is. And individuals can enter and leave without disruption. The business, again, can be a separate entity. You can have that liability protection, and there are different tax deductions. There are tax benefits, especially with the C and S corporation. A corporation may be able to rent the land from shareholders without self-employment tax, right? We can do that with an LLC or with some of the partnership formed as well. So if that's something that you think is beneficial for you and your farm, look into some of these different entities. I know this was a very brief highlight, but we don't want to get into nitty-gritty details because we'll all be here all day. And we do want to highlight piercing the corporate veil, right? We have this silly picture of popping a balloon. And the point of this is, if we are setting up a business for the farm, if we're setting up an LLC, a C corporation, S corporation, where we are actually setting up a separate entity, we need to make sure that we are acting like this is a separate entity, that we're making sure that this is actually run as a business, right? And that includes corporate minutes or monthly minutes, right? We all hear of big corporations on Wall Street, whether that's going to be Apple, whether that's going to be Ford, General Motors, these large corporate entities, they have their quarterly minutes that they report. And right, your farm's probably not a publicly traded entity, but there are some of those corporate standards and metrics that we need to be abiding by, right? Having separate books. Is the entity, is this corporation undercapitalized, right? If we have a farm that grosses $1 million a year, we want to make sure that we have adequate capitalization. Otherwise, the IRS can come in and say, more or less, this is a sham corporation. You are not abiding by the proper corporate rules, and your S corporation can be more or less thrown out the window, and there can be some big tax consequences with that, right? Separate books. Again, finances kept separate from individuals. Again, having those proper minutes, separate, record keeping is kind of a big key here with piercing this corporate veil. But we want to make sure we're all following the rules. Some other benefits of forming these entities, we have these discounting that can be placed. So it is within the bounds of IRS. This is a legal option where we can discount the value of assets. Okay, so you can opt for the market value discount of assets when placing those into an entity. So let's say that we have Nathan LLC or Nathan's Farm LLC, and I'm going to be farming with my brother and sister and the whole family, and we want to place some of our assets, whether that's going to be land or cattle or machinery. We can take these discounts and say, hey, this tractor is not worth $100,000, it's worth $80,000. Right? The typical discount here is $25,000 to $40,000, depending on what that is. And again, we can see there's advantages to that. The advantage is it's going to lower the value of the total estate, which again might make it easier for the incoming generation to buy into this entity if the entity's total valuation is worth a little bit less. The challenge with that on the same token is it's going to lower the basis on those discounted assets. So down the road, if we want to sell those assets, there might be more tax consequences if we have a lower basis that we have to recover. Okay, so we have a note at the bottom. IRS has made rulings both in favor and against discounting. So again, we recommend you work with your accountant, your CPA, your lawyer, to provide adequate insight. Again, if you want to use, there has been cases in the past where they have taken very large discounts on some property where it's going to be over 50%, and those have typically been kind of vetoed or turned down by the IRS. So we want to make sure that we're abiding by the rules, but discounting can be a benefit that you can use. And why is discounting a thing? The reason that discounting is allowable is it has to be these closely, typically family-held businesses where there's a small amount of shareholders, and it's maybe tough to find a valuation on that. I mentioned Apple earlier. You can find the value of Apple any minute of any day by doing a simple Google search on Apple stock, right? Apple stock is worth, I didn't look recently, but $180 a share, whatever that number is. we know how many shares are outstanding, and we can come to a market capitalization rate of what that business is worth. We can't do the same with small family farm businesses or any small business. It's tough to find what that valuation is. The IRS understands that. And also, if we have, 4 shareholders in the farm and we want to sell 1 share to the general public, is there a lot of interest for the general public to own that 1 minority stake share? They have vote, they can always get outvoted with only 1/4 control. There's a lack of marketability, and that's some of the reasons why discounting is allowable. So again, it might be a good option for everyone to look into. Again, role of the entity in the business transfer process. With the entities, we don't have to sell specific pieces of equipment. You're not going to sell the tractor today, the combine next year, and the cattle the year after. You can sell shares into this business entity. You can say, all right, you're going to buy 1% in the LLC this year. Next year, you'll buy an additional 2% or whatever is allowable with finances. Parents can also transfer ownership over time through gifting, if that's something we want to look into. So again, more ease of transitional ownership through the entity. Again, we just want to highlight here with the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, right? That's going to be your USDA office in every county. And if you're a member of any entity that limits your liability, so LP, LLP, LLLP, LLC, or the corporation C or S corporation, that entity as a whole is typically limited to 1 USDA annual limit of $125,000 of total payments. So if you're bumping up against that $125,000 annual limit, you may want to reconsider. I know some of my coworkers have worked with farm families, and they have stayed a general partnership because in a general partnership, each separate partner has the $125,000 limit, whereas an LLP, it's $125,000 total. So with the general partnership, each partner, so you can have 125 or 250 or 375 if you have 2, 3 or more partners in the business. So again, and one other note, before you enter into a business entity, make sure you know your other business partners' history. Do they have a wetland or other conservation violation? Because if they do, it might come back and hurt the business as a whole. Here's a very simple table put together. Again, this is, you can see there's a resource on the bottom of the slide here. The 2017 Land for Good Professional Training from Pennsylvania attorneys kind of help put this together, some of the resources. But we can see the smiley face is good. The frowny face is kind of a negative, and kind of the straight face is really not good or bad. So I'm not going to walk through this table as a whole because you guys can walk through this. We are sharing the PowerPoints through that same link that's in the chat box. But we can just walk through the sole proprietor on the far left-hand side. Structure, pretty easy to set a sole proprietorship up. Taxation, pretty simple. Personal liability, though, has that negative frowny face because there is no personal liability protection. It just doesn't have it. Formation, again, pretty easy. Ease of exit, a little more complicated, right? It has a frowny face. And then that outside investment, again, kind of that frowny face again, because sole proprietor kind of limits some of that outside investment. Again, I'm not going to walk through every entity, but we can see the breakdown of kind of good or bad in a very simple smiley face type of way. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit and move on to property ownership types. And this is different from business entities because we're going to look at more, how do you own land and things like that. Okay, we'll keep on going. Sole ownership. Again, this is one of the simplest forms of ownership. One person owns property. At death, it will be triggered through probate, or probate will be triggered if you have a will or if you die without a will. So let's just say that for a automobile, right? You have a farm truck. You have one person on the name, on the title, right? Nathan owns the truck. If I die, it's going to go through probate. Okay, pretty simple. And again, this is more specific to land here, but tenancy in common. So two or more people own the property together. Ownership shares are not necessarily equal. It's not always 50-50, and it can be 3 or 4 more people, right? It's 2 or more. Upon the death of one tenant, the decedent's portion of the property is included in their estate, triggering probate. So let's just say that my brother and I have some property and tenancy in common. My shares will then transfer to my wife or kids or whoever, and my brother's shares will stay his. So it's kind of a separate ownership of sorts, where it's distinguished how much of that property that I own. If your deed does not specify ownership, it is automatically tenancy in common. That's kind of the default property ownership stake. Whereas the next one here is joint tenancy. So, okay, property is owned equally by 2 or more people. You'll have some specific words in the title: joint tenants with rights of survivorship, not as tenants in common. So in this scenario, upon death, ownership passes to the surviving joint owner. Transfer is automatic, not subject to the decedent's will or trust, not subject to probate on the first death. So my wife and I own our house. We are joint tenancy. So when I die, my wife automatically will own 100% of our homestead, right? We're not going to have, my children won't take my share and then own it. My wife will just get it all because we have joint tenancy. So you just might want to double check some of your ownership types. And again, these are kind of land specific. But yeah, good things to kind of understand. Another ownership type here is some of the life estate and remainder. So life estate is an individual's right to use property and receive income from it until death. Okay, and there's some rules that go along with this. The remainder interest is the right to receive whatever is left when the life estate ends. So whoever the remainder is, if that's the kids, if that's grandkids or another entity, another person, life estate ends at the death of the holder. And just to highlight again, Minnesota can recover value of life estate put into place after August 1st of 2003. So we're talking 20 years ago, for Medicaid or medical assistance. So we're talking about nursing home care. If you go into a nursing home and you set up this life estate 5 years ago, Minnesota can come after the life estate portion. And here's the table. So again, the age that's determined. That is the life estate individual's age. So if you start this at age 64, you will own roughly 69%, and the remainder, so your kids or family or whoever that remainder is, they will own the other 31%. And we can see that life estate portion goes down and the remainder interest goes up. Okay, it always equals 100%. Once you're 75, it's roughly 50-50. Once you're 85, roughly 1/3, 2/3. And even at you're 95, it's still roughly 1/4 and 3/4. So in this case, if you go to a nursing home, Minnesota for medical assistance will only go after the life estate portion. So it might be one way to protect some of it. There's a question specifically on a life estate set up in 1994. I don't exactly know how to answer that question. I need a few more specifics on the valuation.
Actually, Nathan, she is working with Dave in the Q&A, and it's a follow-up to another question that she had. So you're clear
I
to
will let
go.
Dave answer that. Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
So again, life estate can be a good tool. Ownership by contract. So again, this is going to be for some of the other assets that you own, right? So what about beneficiary designations? So what about life insurance, right? So you have beneficiaries, right? Or what about some of your retirement accounts, right? There's all different types of assets that we own. So getting back to the beneficiary designations, if it's correct, the asset passes to the beneficiary, right? If it says that, you know, my son gets the life insurance claim, that's it. There's no fighting about it. It's what is the beneficiaries on that. So we do want to highlight, maybe you set up your retirement accounts when you started working 30, 40 years ago. Maybe it's time to check what your beneficiaries are. I know sometimes you have your beneficiary as your spouse or children, and unfortunately we don't, sometimes we, fortunately, unfortunately, we outlive our spouse or children, and we want to make sure these beneficiaries are still alive and correct. So please double check who your beneficiaries are for life insurance, for retirement accounts, for all these different claims that are out there. Also, transferring to a trust, assets at death pass through the trust to the heirs, depends on how the trust is set up. And then other designations. So we have pay on death. So that's going to be more applicable to your checking account, savings account, CDs at a bank. Same thing with transfer on death. Again, that's going to be more investment accounts. If you have the transfer on death set up properly, it should transfer on death to that next person in line. Transfer on death deed, again, that's more real estate, whereas you can put up the TODD, and then once you die, your land will go directly to your kids or your spouse or whoever your transfer on death deed is. And I have had people tell me that they find that to be a good tool just to throw their children on the farmland on as a TODD so that they have less reason to fight over who gets it, if that is the proper way to phrase it. So TODD can be a utilized tool. Also the life estate or contract for deed. So again, just make sure these ownerships are the proper people you want to be. Okay, ownership method does not protect assets from lawsuits or other adverse actions like the nursing home, right? We're not going to talk about the nursing home all day today, but it's a legitimate fear or concern that the state will come in and force the sale to pay your medical assistance bill. A lot of these ownership titlings is not going to stop any of that. So just keep that in mind. Individuals or tenants in common, ownership requires probate upon the first death if there's will. The joint tenancy ownership avoids probate upon the first death, but may require probate upon the second death because that's how it transfers through that joint tenancy. Okay, ownership can affect full or partial step up in basis, right? This depends on who owns it. Again, when it comes to assets, so we're kind of changing gears here, but when it comes to asset ownership, you have three major transfer choices. You can sell your assets, you can gift your assets, or use an inheritance mechanism to transfer these assets. And each of these three choices have possible basis and tax consequences. So with that, yeah, again, sales are while you're alive, gifts are while you're alive, and those inheritance, that's after we pass on. So for your farm transition process, right, for your plan that you have, do you plan on using sales, gifts, or inheritance, or a combination of all 1, 2, or 3 of these? And again, we're not going to ask the audience their direct answers, but I just want people to understand this. So we were going to talk briefly about basis. So basis is the cost to recover when you sell an asset. Your basis may change year to year, and it's going to be your adjusted basis. Basis is typically your initial purchase price of that asset, plus or minus depreciation, or plus or minus some repairs. So if you have a tractor, actually, I'm just going to skip ahead. So if you purchase an asset, your basis is what you paid for it, plus improvements, less any depreciation take over time. So if you purchased a tractor 5 years ago for $175,000, that was a purchase price, and you have taken $98,000 worth of depreciation the last few years, your adjusted basis there is $77,000. So again, your adjusted basis changes over time. It's going to change annually. Okay? Some assets are capital assets, generally anything owned for personal or investment purposes, stocks, bonds, your house, things like that. Farmland, machinery, buildings, and breeding livestock are by IRS definition not capital assets, but they may receive capital gains treatment subject to depreciation recapture. So again, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and we don't want to overwhelm you, but we want everyone to be aware of the different tax consequences that happen with selling assets. So if you sell an asset, if you sell your son that tractor that was valued at $77,000, there is no step up in basis. The selling price is the new basis for the new owner. If we sell that tractor for $77,000, that's the basis for the next owner. That's their basis. We do want to be aware that we can create capital gains tax implications for the old owner if it has a very low basis in that asset. So a lot of machinery has been fully depreciated, right? We tend to take a lot of Section 179 depreciation and other bonus depreciation that accelerates the depreciation on that asset. So it's not uncommon for machinery that's over a few years old to have zero tax basis. So everything that you sell that for is income for the IRS. So just keep that in mind. Contract for deed can create tax implications if done late in life and death occurs. Heirs will continue to pay taxes on that principal and interest payments. So just keep that in mind. Large one-time sales can cause tax issues for the seller and be financially difficult for the entering generation, right? Selling everything lock, stock, and barrel can have tax consequences. Installment sales can spread income over the duration of the sale and lower the tax burden. So maybe we're going to have that installment sale of a 5 or 10-year period that can be beneficial. Piecemeal sales also can work well, where we're going to sell the tractor this year, the combine next year, cows the year after. That's where the piecemeal option comes in. Crop and market livestock sales are subject to self-employment tax. So again, we want everyone to be aware, to talk with their tax professional, lawyer if need be, to make sure we're doing the best in terms of limiting our tax liability, because if we sell over multiple years, can lower the tax burden. So selling $20,000 of cows, having an unclaimed depreciation amount of $5,000 will result in $15,000 of taxable income. So how is this tax going to be taxed, right? Or how is the income going to be taxed? And it depends. We have this somewhat cute diagram that hopefully makes sense. So we are going to say that we bought a small tractor, right? A little lawn tractor, whatever it is. We spent $10,000 on it. We bought it a few years ago and have used it. We have taken $5,000 worth of depreciation on this piece of equipment. Our $5,000 adjusted basis, or $5,000 is our adjusted basis in this piece of machinery. We now sell that same piece of machinery for $20,000. We got a good price for it. The initial $5,000 is going to be depreciation recapture. That's going to be to our original purchase price. So that'll be $5,000 of depreciation recapture. That will be ordinary income, not subject to self-employment tax. The additional $10,000 to get us to the final sale price of $20,000, that will be capital gains. So that'll be $10,000 of capital gains, and then capital gains rates differs as well. The first roughly $80,000 have a 0% charge, and then it's 15 up to 20% capital gains tax rate. So just keep that in mind. Selling current assets. When selling current assets, there is no basis. So if we are selling raised corn or livestock, there's going to be no basis. We do get to deduct eligible expenses. We must consider our ordinary income tax rates, self-employment rate, and possibly the Medicare surtax. So that's over X amount of dollars. There is a kind of a Medicare surtax. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that is something we want to be aware of. And like I said, please talk with your accountant before you start selling everything. So again, be aware of depreciation, recapture, and capital gains, right? It's all going to be taxable, but we want to help limit the amount of taxes that people unnecessarily would have to pay, right? We want you to have appropriate tax bill and not inappropriate. Consider again self-employment tax. And then also, how do these sales fit into your broader farm succession goals? Is this helping the income and generation by selling these assets, or is the timing right? So just think about the broader goals as well as talking with your accountant on the best way to do things. And again, be a good consumer of legal and financial advice. I've mentioned about 5 times in the last 20 minutes about working with your accountant and lawyer if need be to do these sales properly. Careful legal planning with your attorney and accountant can help prevent mistakes. And again, I did not provide legal, financial, or tax advice. I simply am trying to help educate you guys on some of the tax consequences to be aware of, so you don't go in to talk with your accountant and kind of blindsided by something where hopefully we just introduced this topic. We've shared this throughout kind of the workshop so far this morning. We have recorded these, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. You can see the link is on the top there. That link is also through the Zoom email that Suzanne sent yesterday and this morning. Also, the PDF of the PowerPoints and some of the other material are available at that second link, which is also available through that email and the chat box today. If you are looking for more information, we will have some in-person events. We do some in-person farm transition workshops. We are starting to get some scheduled, I think January, March, and even this December, we have a few starting to get scheduled. So keep looking at our University of Minnesota Extension website where we advertise those, and we will try to keep everybody in the loop. With that, any questions? I know that Dave and Suzanne have been answering some throughout the webinar this morning. I will pause for 1 minute for more questions, and I have just a couple follow-up resources that we want to share with the group.
That's what I just wanted to add, Nathan. We've been doing a lot of Q&A in the Q&A. So I think we don't have anything that needs to be answered live unless something new comes in.
Looks like one just came in. They're complaining that the link is not working. I'll let
Okay.
Suzanne answer that.
Is it for the
It's a
webinar?
Q&A.
Okay, let me look here.
Call it the
Okay.
Q&A. As Suzanne looks to double check that, I will continue with just a few more resources that we found kind of timely to share with the group. So again, if there's any more questions, feel free to answer them. This information is from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So I just want to highlight this, that there is a state tax credit for both landowners and sellers who work with beginning farmers. So eligible assets include farmland, livestock, facilities, so like buildings, machinery. Funding is not unlimited, so kind of get on this. It's first come, first serve. It's open in January each year. There may not be much left for this year in terms of funding for this tax credit. And this is the dollar amounts. And we can see some of these due dates are already passed, but we do have the sales that are open through the 1st of November. And again, it's a first come, first serve. Minnesota from legislature has X amount of dollars that the Department of Agriculture can apply for these beginning tax credits. But you can see with sales, it's 8 to 12% of a sales price. So if you want to sell farmland for $500,000 to a beginning farmer, you can save up to $50,000 as a tax credit that goes to the seller. So, but it's just incentive to work with beginning farmers and help them kind of start in the process. So again, there's emails or there's applications online. So feel free to look through the Minnesota Department of Ag Beginning Farmer Tax Credit for more information on that. Also, for first-time farm buyers, there is a $15,000 grant, no cash max, but the applicant must contribute at least $8,000 from their own funding. And this application closes pretty soon here, September 15th. So we want to share this with everybody that's out there. You have, 2-3 weeks to get some of these paperwork filled out. I know it's kind of a short notice, but again, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has this down payment assistance grant available on their website. So if you are interested or you know someone who this would apply with, please send this out. And then again, one final list of resources here. We have the Department of Agriculture's email updates. They have farm advocates who will provide free one-on-one business support. There is the Farm Business Management Team, who they have instructors across the state that help work one-on-one with farm businesses. Farm Link is this land access directory. Farm Access Hub, which is again this one-on-one land access navigation panel. And then RFA Loan. So Rural Finance Authority has some low interest loans to help you get started farming. And Jenny Heck is the Minnesota Department of Agriculture resource. And if you have questions on those last couple slides, her email and phone number is listed there. So again, if you have questions on some of those Department of Agriculture resources, Jenny Heck is the best resource, not Dave, Suzanne, or I. So with that, again, we just want to share those. There is some money available, and we're here to help everybody navigate some of the channels of selling assets and some of the grants and other resources that are available. And the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has some pretty good resources for everyone to consider. And I just switched back to our question slide, and I will just see what other questions are coming through. Suzanne has shared the link both to our Google Drive of information. Hopefully this link works a little bit better. I know we had one complaint about it earlier. And then also the link to the YouTube channel. We do post regularly to our YouTube channel week 1. You know, last Wednesday we had our discussion on goal planning and family communication. That is posted on YouTube. That is ready to view. I know as of like Monday, we had like 40 views already. So people are watching it. People are finding it. And yeah, hopefully everyone has found this helpful. And again, feel free to write questions in the chat or through the Q&A box. I know Suzanne has been typing through there and Dave have been answering them. As of now, there are no open questions. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We actually had about 140 people on today, so a pretty large crowd. So I want to thank you for paying attention. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully we all learned something. We will be here next Wednesday on August 28th, starting at 10 o'clock yet again. So again, this is a 4-part series. This is week 2. We have week 3 and week 4 yet that we will be going over. We have another comment in the chat that as well as the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the United States Department of Agriculture, and your local county FSA office has other loan and grant opportunities for young and beginning farmers. And I know as well, if you are a beginning farmer, which typically it's 10 years or less of Schedule F income, you can get better rates on crop insurance. There are some crop insurance deductions or decreases in your bill on the premiums that you have to pay, as well as with your FSA office. There's different programs, and maybe you can get a little better loan rate with some of the FSA loans if you're working with FSA on financing. So just keep that in mind. There are some programs out there. Again, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has some of those sale of loans or sale of asset assistant tax credits. Again, first come, first served basis. There might not be a whole lot of money available at this time, but they should have money available next year. I don't know if it's set in stone, but there are resources to help. I'll stick around for another few minutes as long as there are questions coming in. That's all we have today. People are kind of starting to exit our